The Biltmore Estate, North Carolina. Marcus, a 15-year-old homeless boy, was hiding in the gardens looking for food when he saw something impossible through the mansion windows. Madison Sterling, the paralyzed daughter of tech billionaire James Sterling, was in her wheelchair moving her arms to music only she could hear, tears streaming down her face as she danced alone in the empty ballroom. Her father had spent millions on treatments, but nothing had given her back what the accident took. Marcus had nothing. No home, no family, no future. But he had something Madison had lost, the memory of what it felt like to truly dance. What he did next would not only change both their lives, but would show the world that sometimes the poorest among us carry the richest gifts. He walked through those mansion doors, knowing he'd probably be arrested, approached this girl who had everything except what mattered most, and said the words that would shake America. "I can teach you to fly without legs. I've been flying without wings my whole life." The September sun painted the Blue Ridge Mountains in shades of gold and amber, transforming the Biltmore Estate into something out of a fairy tale. But fairy tales, Marcus knew, were for people who had homes to read them in. He'd been walking since dawn from Asheville, where the police had cleared out the underpass where he'd been sleeping. His stomach had been empty for 2 days, and the Biltmore's vast gardens, with their promise of tourist scraps and maybe some fruit from the heritage orchards, had drawn him like a magnet. Marcus Thompson had learned to be invisible. At 15, he'd mastered the art of moving through spaces without being seen, of existing in the margins where security cameras had blind spots and guards got lazy. His mother had died of cancer when he was 8. His father had disappeared into a bottle, and then into nothing at all. 7 years of foster homes, group homes, and finally the streets had taught him that visibility meant vulnerability. He was skirting the edge of the formal gardens, staying in the tree line, when he heard it. Music floating from the mansion. Not the recorded stuff they played for tourists, but something raw and beautiful. Drawn despite his better judgment, Marcus crept closer to the windows of what looked like a private wing, separate from the tourist areas. What he saw through the glass stopped him cold. In a ballroom that could have held hundreds, a girl about his age sat alone in a wheelchair. But she wasn't still. Her upper body moved with the grace of someone who'd been trained, her arms creating shapes in the air, her head tilting and turning with the rhythm only she could hear through her earbuds. Her face was a masterpiece of contradiction. Beauty marked by loss, joy fractured by grief, determination fighting against despair. Marcus recognized that look. He'd seen it in his own reflection in store windows. The look of someone trying to remember who they used to be. Madison Sterling, though Marcus didn't know her name yet, was dancing the only way she could. 3 years ago, a drunk driver had taken her legs, her dreams of Juilliard, her identity as one of the most promising young ballet dancers in America. Her father, James Sterling, had built his tech empire on solving impossible problems, but all his billions couldn't solve this one. The best doctors in the world, experimental treatments in Switzerland, stem cell trials that pushed the boundaries of science. Nothing had brought back what 17 seconds of twisted metal had stolen. Marcus watched, transfixed, as Madison's dance became more desperate, more angry. She was fighting against the chair, against gravity, against the cruel joke of a body that remembered how to fly, but had forgotten how to stand. Her movements became wilder, and then, in a moment that would haunt Marcus forever, she tried to stand. The crash was horrible. Madison fell, pulling a side table with her, a crystal vase shattering into 1,000 pieces that caught the light like fallen stars. She lay on the floor, not trying to get up, just sobbing with the kind of abandon that comes when you think no one is watching. But someone was watching. And Marcus made a decision that went against every survival instinct the streets had taught him. He tried the French doors, unlocked, Probably because who would dare enter James Sterling's private sanctuary? He walked in, his dirty sneakers leaving prints on marble that cost more per square foot than most people made in a year. Madison heard the footsteps and looked up, her tear-stained face cycling through surprise, fear, and then strange recognition. Not of him personally, but of what he represented. Someone else who knew what it was like to have the ground pulled out from under you. Marcus knelt beside Madison, careful not to touch her. The streets had taught him about boundaries, about how touch could be weapon or comfort, depending on trust. He could hear footsteps approaching, probably security alerted by the crash, and knew he had seconds before his life got infinitely worse. But something in Madison's eyes held him there. "I saw you dancing," he said simply. Madison laughed bitterly, the sound like breaking glass. "I can't dance. Can't you see? I'm paralyzed from the waist down. I'm nothing." "You're not nothing. You're just dancing different." Security burst in then. Two men built like NFL linebackers, hands already reaching for the homeless kid kneeling next to their boss's daughter. But Madison raised her hand, a gesture that carried the authority of someone who'd grown up with power, even if she felt powerless now. "Wait," she said. Then to Marcus, "Who are you?" The story came out in pieces as Marcus helped her back into her chair, his hands surprisingly gentle for someone who'd learned to fight for everything. His name, his age, his life on the streets. But more importantly, he told her about dance, how he'd learned by watching through the windows of studios he couldn't afford, practicing in abandoned buildings where the floors were dangerous, but the space was free. How movement had been his escape when life became unbearable. How he'd dance for tourists near the Grove Park Inn, earning enough for food while pretending he was on stage at Lincoln Center. "Show me," Madison said suddenly. Marcus looked at the security guards, who seemed ready to tackle him at any moment, then at Madison's face, which held something he hadn't seen in years. Genuine interest, not pity or disgust. He began to move, without music, without proper shoes, on marble that was meant for waltz, not street dance. Marcus showed her what 7 years of dancing through pain looked like. It was raw, untrained in the classical sense, but it had something no amount of money could buy: authenticity. Every movement told a story of survival, of finding beauty in broken places, of turning suffering into art. When he stopped, Madison was crying again, but these were different tears. James Sterling chose that moment to enter, and the temperature in the room dropped 10 degrees. The billionaire who'd negotiated with presidents and made Fortune 500 CEOs sweat took in the scene. His daughter in her chair, a homeless boy standing too close, his security guards looking confused. "What's going on here?" His voice could have frozen fire. But before security could grab Marcus, Madison did something she hadn't done in 3 years. She laughed. Real, genuine laughter that filled the ballroom like light. "Dad, this is Marcus. He's going to teach me to fly." James Sterling had made his fortune by seeing patterns others missed, by finding value where others saw waste. But standing in his ballroom, looking at his daughter's face, alive in a way it hadn't been since the accident, while a homeless teenager stood there in clothes that were more holes than fabric, he couldn't process what he was seeing. The interrogation that followed was clinical. James grilled Marcus about his past, his intentions, his background. Marcus answered honestly. He had nothing to lose by lying, but even less to gain. Yes, he'd been arrested for petty theft. Food. Always food. Yes, he'd been in and out of foster care. No, he had no family, no home, no real education past 8th grade. "And you think you can help my daughter?" James's voice dripped skepticism. Marcus looked him straight in the eye, something that took more courage than stealing ever had. "I can't make her walk, but I can teach her that dancing isn't about legs. It's about soul, and hers is still there. I saw it." Madison intervened then, with a force that surprised all 3 men. She explained what she'd felt watching Marcus dance. not pity for his circumstances, but envy for his freedom. He danced like someone who had nothing to lose, while she'd been paralyzed by having too much to lose. She wanted to learn that fearlessness. The proposition that emerged was typical of James Sterling, complex, calculated, but with room for the unexpected. Marcus would live in the guest house on the estate. He'd return to school, a real school, not the continuation programs where they warehoused kids like him. He'd have access to the dance studio James had built for Madison before the accident, the one that had been locked for 3 years. In exchange, he'd spend afternoons with Madison, teaching her his raw, unfiltered approach to movement. "I'm not a charity case," Marcus said, pride overcoming sense. "No," James agreed. "You're an investment. I invest in things that show potential. My daughter hasn't shown potential in 3 years. You made her laugh in 3 minutes. That's a return worth exploring." The first weeks were a disaster barely contained. Marcus didn't know which fork to use at dinner, let alone how to navigate the world of the Sterling estate. The staff looked at him with suspicion ranging from mild to hostile. Who was this street kid the boss had dragged in? What made him special? But Madison was transformed. She woke up early for the first time in years, insisting on being in the studio by 7. She watched Marcus with the eyes of someone relearning how to see, studying how he found rhythm in everything. The sound of rain on windows, the hum of the air conditioning, the distant noise of gardeners working. "Teach me to dance, Angry," she said one day. "I've been dancing sad for 3 years. I want to dance angry." So he did. He taught her to use her chair as an instrument, not a prison. To find power in her arms, expression in her torso, fury in the way she moved through space. He taught her that limitation could become style, that what you couldn't do mattered less than what you could do with conviction. Word spread through Asheville's elite that James Sterling had taken in a homeless boy. The rumors were vicious, everything from inappropriate relationships to mental breakdown. The country club whispered, the charity boards gossiped, and the media started sniffing around for a story.
Enjoying the story? Give it a little like, and don't forget to subscribe. Now then, let's carry on.
The truth came out at the Sterling Foundation's annual gala, the event where North Carolina's wealthy gathered to write checks and be seen writing them. This year, Madison had insisted on attending, her first public appearance since the accident. The ballroom at the Grove Park Inn was packed with 500 guests who'd paid $1,000 a plate to support spinal cord research. Madison looked stunning in a midnight blue gown, but everyone's eyes were on Marcus, uncomfortably wearing a tuxedo that cost more than he'd seen in his lifetime. The evening proceeded predictably until the entertainment portion. The orchestra began playing, and couples took to the floor for the traditional waltz. Madison sat at the head table, watching with the expression Marcus had learned to recognize, the one that meant she was seeing what she'd lost. Without warning, Marcus stood and walked to the center of the empty dance floor. The orchestra stopped, confused. 500 wealthy people turned to stare at the homeless boy who dared interrupt their evening. But Marcus wasn't looking at them. He was looking at Madison. He began to move. No music except what was in his head, and his movement told a story, her story. The rise of a dancer, the crash that broke her, the chair that held her, the spirit that refused to die. He danced her anger, her grief, her defiance. Then he stopped in front of her and held out his hand. The room held its breath. Madison looked at her father, who was frozen between intervention and curiosity. Then she placed her hand in Marcus's. What happened next made headlines around the world. Marcus lifted Madison from her chair with the strength of someone who'd carried heavier burdens. But instead of the pitying slow dance everyone expected, they exploded into movement. Marcus supported her completely, but created the illusion that she was dancing independently. He spun her, dipped her, lifted her toward the ceiling as her arms created shapes that belonged in the American Ballet Theater. Madison's face was radiant, tears streaming but smiling, like the sun breaking through storm clouds. She was flying, truly flying, for the first time since the accident. When the music finally stopped, the orchestra had found their rhythm and joined in. Marcus gently placed Madison back in her chair. The silence lasted 3 heartbeats. Then someone started clapping. An elderly woman, Marcus would later learn, was a former prima ballerina who'd retired to Asheville. She stood, tears on her weathered face, applauding like her life depended on it. The ovation that followed lasted 10 minutes. But the moment that went viral, that changed everything, came after. James Sterling walked onto the dance floor, this billionaire who'd never shown emotion in public, and hugged Marcus. Then he said into the microphone, "This young man has given my daughter something all my money couldn't buy, himself, without asking for anything in return. That's not charity. That's humanity." The video hit 1 million views in 6 hours. Homeless boy makes paralyzed girl fly. Billionaire's daughter dances again. The street kid who saved Madison Sterling. The headlines proliferated, and with them came scrutiny. Reporters dug into Marcus's past, finding the arrests, the foster care records, even tracking down a distant aunt who said she'd always known he'd amount to nothing. They painted him as either a gold digger or a saint, nothing in between. The foster care system tried to claim him, saying a minor couldn't legally live with the Sterlings without formal guardianship. Worse, rumors started that Marcus and Madison were romantically involved. Photos of them practicing, him holding her looking at him with obvious adoration, the physical intimacy necessary for their dance partnership, were twisted into something inappropriate. Madison was 16 now, Marcus 15, and the internet had opinions about everything. The pressure came from all sides. James's board of directors worried about the company image. Friends advised him to distance himself from the boy before scandal destroyed everything. Even Marcus's old street friends showed up, wanting their piece of his supposed windfall. But the worst blow came from Child Protective Services. Someone had filed an anonymous complaint suggesting Madison was being exploited, that the situation was inappropriate. The investigation that followed was brutal. Separate interviews, supervised visits, the threat of Marcus being placed back in foster care. During one particularly harsh interview, Madison lost it. She wheeled herself into the CPS office uninvited and delivered a speech that someone filmed and posted online. She talked about how Marcus saw her as a person, not a tragedy, how he'd taught her that breaking didn't mean broken, how the system that was supposed to protect children had failed him for 15 years, and now wanted to fail him again, just when he'd found stability. "You want to know what's inappropriate?" she said to the stone-faced social worker. "It's a system that throws away kids like Marcus because they're inconvenient. It's a society that values money over merit. It's adults who see something beautiful and immediately assume it must be dirty. Marcus saved my life, not my legs. Those are gone forever. My life. And if you take him away, you might as well take me too, because I'll be just as lost as I was before." The investigation was dropped after Madison's video went viral, generating millions of views and a tsunami of public support. But James Sterling knew they couldn't go back to the way things were. The world was watching now, and every move would be scrutinized. So he did what he did best. He innovated. He created the Foundation for Artistic Recovery, specifically designed to pair young artists from disadvantaged backgrounds with individuals recovering from trauma. Marcus would be the first fellow, officially employed as a movement therapist while completing his education. But the real surprise came from Marcus himself. On his 16th birthday, standing in the studio where he'd taught Madison to fly, he made an announcement that stunned everyone. He was choreographing a full production, Broken Wings, that would feature dancers with disabilities paired with street dancers. Half the proceeds would go to homeless youth programs, half to spinal cord research. "Everyone thinks this is about charity," Marcus said. looking directly at the cameras James had allowed in for the announcement. It's not. It's about recognizing that everyone has something to offer. Madison taught me as much as I taught her. She showed me that having everything doesn't protect you from loss. I showed her that having nothing doesn't mean you have nothing to give. The production premiered 6 months later at the Durham Performing Arts Center. The audience included everyone from homeless kids bussed in from shelters to billionaire philanthropists who'd flown in from New York. The show was raw, beautiful, and impossible to watch without crying. The climax was a pas de deux between Marcus and Madison that told their story without words. He in street clothes, she in a flowing dress that incorporated her wheelchair into the design. They moved together and apart, lifting and being lifted, showing that support could flow both directions. When Madison rose from her chair, supported by Marcus but appearing to float, the audience gasped. When Marcus fell and Madison, still in his arms, cushioned his landing, they understood. We all take turns being strong. The Sterling Center for Integrated Dance in Asheville has become a model replicated worldwide. It's a place where kids from the streets learn ballet, where paralyzed athletes discover new ways to move, where brokenness becomes beauty. Marcus Thompson Sterling, James had officially adopted him on his 18th birthday, is now 20, one of the most innovative choreographers in America. He splits his time between New York, where he's completing a degree at Juilliard on full scholarship, and Asheville, where he continues to work with Madison. Madison Sterling, 21, has become a filmmaker, documenting stories of resilience and recovery. Her film about Marcus, Flying Without Wings, won an Oscar for Best Documentary Short. She still can't walk, but she can fly, in the air with Marcus's support, and behind the camera, where she captures others learning to soar. They're not romantically involved, despite what the internet spent years speculating. Their bond is something deeper. Two souls who saved each other, who found family in the most unexpected place. Madison is dating a photographer she met at NYU. Marcus is engaged to a former foster kid who's now a social worker, someone who understands his journey. James Sterling has changed, too. The ruthless billionaire who measured everything in profit margins now measures success in lives transformed. He still runs his tech empire, but his real passion is the foundation, which has helped thousands of young people find their wings. On the 5th anniversary of that first dance in the Biltmore ballroom, they gathered there again. Marcus, Madison, James, and 100 kids from the program. As the sun set over the Blue Ridge Mountains, Marcus lifted Madison one more time, spinning her as she laughed with the pure joy of someone who'd learned that falling isn't the opposite of flying. It's part of the journey. A young girl who'd just aged out of foster care, watching from her wheelchair, asked Marcus how he'd known what to do that first day. Marcus smiled, remembering the desperate boy who'd walked through those doors with nothing to lose. I didn't know what to do. I just knew what it felt like to be broken. And sometimes, that's enough, knowing you're not broken alone. The Foundation's motto, inscribed in bronze at every center they've opened, captures what Marcus and Madison learned together. We all have wings. Some are just harder to see. James Sterling died peacefully 2 years later. His fortune distributed between his company, the Foundation, and trusts for Marcus and Madison. His funeral was attended by thousands, but the image that made front pages worldwide was Marcus and Madison at the grave. Him standing, her in her chair, both crying for the man who'd had the courage to let a homeless boy teach his daughter to fly. Today, if you visit the Biltmore Estate, you might catch a glimpse of the bronze plaque in the garden where Marcus first hid. On this spot in 2019, a homeless boy saw a paralyzed girl dancing and decided to help her fly. In doing so, he taught America that wealth isn't what you have, it's what you're willing to give. If this story touched your heart, leave a like to support stories that prove miracles still exist. Comment with the moment that moved you most. Share with those who need to believe that kindness can change the world. Subscribe for more stories that show how love overcomes every barrier. Remember, sometimes angels come dressed in rags. Sometimes salvation comes from those who have nothing to give but themselves. And sometimes, to truly fly, you must first learn to lift someone else. Have you ever met someone who changed your life when you least expected it? Tell us in the comments.